You've been using your brain wrong your entire life.
It's a pretty aggressive way to start, right?
Oh, totally. But I mean, that is literally the opening line of our source text today. It's this really unsparing book called The Efficiency of Error, Unmasking Cognitive Shortcuts. And, before you instinctively brush that off or maybe get a little defensive about the premise, just consider this. Your brain's primary driving biological job is not actually to find the absolute objective truth of the universe.
No, not at all.
Right, it's just to keep you from starving to death. And according to this text, it actually accomplishes that mission by distorting your reality, kind of skipping vital information, and essentially lying to you on a minute-by-minute basis.
Which is, a tough pill to swallow for most people.
Yeah, I mean, we all like to think we're these hyper-rational beings, but we're really digging into this material today for our deep dive, exploring why the human mind actively prioritizes sheer speed over accuracy and, well, how you can actually spot this invisible machinery operating right inside your own head.
Yeah, and it forces us to immediately dismantle that sort of romanticized view we have of our own cognition. Because we tend to operate under this assumption that the brain is this pinnacle of truth-seeking biological engineering. Like
a flawless supercomputer.
Exactly, a flawless supercomputer taking in raw data, crunching all the variables, and outputting a perfectly accurate picture of the world. But the text shatters that instantly. The reality is the brain is not trying to make you smart. It is desperately trying to manage a severely limited energy budget.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp the mechanics of that, we basically need to retire that supercomputer analogy entirely.
Oh, 100%.
Because a supercomputer implies infinite processing power plugged directly into the wall, right? Based on the source material, a much more accurate model is actually just a smartphone. But specifically a smartphone that is permanently, irreversibly stuck in low power mode.
That's the perfect way to look at it.
You know the state I'm talking about. Your battery drops to 10%, you get the little pop-up, the screen dims, background apps just stop refreshing, and the processor throttles way down to do the absolute bare minimum just to keep the device from going dark.
Right.
The author argues that this is your brain's default state. It is constantly dimming the screen on your reality because conscious thought is just, well, it's just too metabolically expensive.
The low power mode analogy is highly effective here, honestly, because it maps perfectly onto the underlying neuroscience the text points toward. Conscious analytical thought, what psychologists often refer to as system 2 thinking, literally drains glucose from your prefrontal cortex.
Wow, so it's a physical drain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It requires a massive expenditure of metabolic resources. I mean, your brain only makes up about 2% of your total body weight.
Right, it's tiny.
But it demands 20% of your body's resting energy.
20%. That is wild.
It is. So if you actually process every new piece of information deeply, analyzed every single variable, and weighed every possible outcome before making a choice, you would trigger a biological crash.
You'd just be exhausted.
You would be physically exhausted before you even finish tying your shoes in the morning. So the brain has to shift to an entirely different operating system just to survive.
Which I guess brings us directly to how it pulls off that survival trick. Because if the brain biologically cannot afford to think deeply all the time, it has to rely on something else.
Yes, and the text explicitly defines that something else as cognitive shortcuts.
Or biases.
Exactly, biases.
Now, we all kind of know about cognitive biases in a general sense, but what I found so compelling here is that this text strips away the usual psychological jargon. And it strips away the moral weight we usually attach to the word bias.
It really does. It reframes it completely.
It frames a bias purely as a biological calorie saver. It's a heuristic, a cognitive leap, where the brain encounters a problem, sees steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and says nope, and just jumps straight to step 5 to save the glucose.
Right. It's an algorithmic heuristic. So instead of dedicating precious metabolic energy to processing the unique, granular nuances of a specific moment, the brain just recognizes a rough pattern.
Like, oh, I've seen this before.
Exactly. It pulls up a prepackaged rule from its database and applies it instantly. It just says, I've seen a scenario vaguely shaped like this before. Here is our standard response. Deploy it and move on. It is relentlessly efficient.
But wait, this is where I have to push back a little bit on the author's core framing.
Okay, let's hear.
Because the opening line is, you've been using your brain wrong your entire life. But if the brain's ultimate biological objective is to preserve energy, and these heuristic shortcuts successfully achieve that goal, aren't we actually using our brains perfectly right?
That's a really good point.
I mean, from a purely evolutionary standpoint, the brain is executing its programming flawlessly. So is the real friction here simply that our modern expectation of the brain, like this desire for it to be an objective, rational actor in a highly complex world, is just completely clashing with its messy biological imperative to just keep the lights on?
What's fascinating here is that you've just isolated the exact evolutionary mismatch the author's driving at. You're entirely correct that from a historical survival standpoint, the brain is functioning exactly as designed.
Right, because back in the day, speed was everything.
Exactly. For the vast majority of human evolution, surviving meant making extremely fast, quote-unquote, good enough decisions. If you hear a sudden rustle in the tall grass, you do not stop to conduct a statistical analysis of wind patterns.
Right, you don't check to see if it's just a breeze.
No, you definitely don't weigh the migration habits of predatory animals. You take the cognitive shortcut Russell equals danger and you run. That bias not only saves your life, it saves the actual metabolic energy you need to do the running. It is a biological triumph.
But we don't live in the tall grass anymore.
And that's exactly it. The text forces us to confront the reality that we no longer live in that environment. We operate in a highly complex, nuanced, data-driven modern society. And the critical point the excerpt makes is that while these shortcuts successfully help you decide faster, the inescapable trade-off is a catastrophic drop in accuracy.
A drop in accuracy that is completely hidden from us, too. Because, I mean, it's one thing to have a cognitive shortcut about a rustling bush, right? It's another thing entirely to rely on a biological heuristic when you're, say, analyzing a quarterly financial report.
Or deciding whether to hire a specific candidate.
Exactly. Or scrolling through a dense, highly polarized political article online. The environment has become infinitely more complex, but we're basically still using the exact same blunt biological instruments to navigate it.
We are. And the text doesn't merely state that these shortcuts make you wrong. It adds a crucial caveat that I honestly think is the most alarming part of the entire analysis.
Yeah, I know the line you're talking about.
It states that these shortcuts make you wrong more than you think. We are not just making occasional errors. We are operating with a systemic blindness to our own inaccuracy.
Yes, that specific phrase, more than you think, is what really grounded this for me.
Yeah.
Because it implies that the error isn't the exception, it's the rule.
It's the default state.
Right. So to visualize this, let's go back to our smartphone analogy. Think about your phone's autocomplete function.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
We use it constantly, right? You're typing a message, and the operating system tries to predict the end of your sentence to save you the physical effort of typing out every single letter. It prioritizes speed, and, well, most of the time it works.
Most of the time.
But we've all had that distinct moment of panic where you hit send, you look at the screen, and you realize the autocomplete has completely altered the meaning of your text. Like it swaps out definitely for defiantly.
Oh, yeah, and suddenly you've sent a completely unhinged, highly combative message to your manager.
Exactly. And the text is basically arguing that our cognitive biases are just the brain's autocomplete running constantly in the background. We're just too tired to type out the deep thoughts.
The autocomplete analogy works so well, but there is one terrifying difference that we really need to emphasize here. On your phone, you actually see the suggested word before you hit send, or at least you can see it right after.
Right. There's a visual record.
Exactly. If you are paying attention, you have the opportunity to catch the error and correct it. But in your brain, the autocomplete happens entirely subconsciously. You basically send the text to your reality without ever knowing the word was changed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the brain instantly predicts the reality, fills in the blanks, and serves it to your conscious mind as if it were the objective truth.
So there is just zero friction. The lack of friction is why we don't realize how often we are actually wrong.
Precisely. Because the sheer speed of the shortcut creates an incredibly powerful biological illusion of competence. Psychologists refer to this as cognitive fluency.
Cognitive fluency.
Right. When a thought or a decision comes to your mind quickly and easily, without any mental strain, your brain automatically tags that thought as true.
So the lack of friction just masquerades as deep thinking.
Yes. You feel like you've made a rational, considered decision, say, instantly disliking a new coworker's proposal. But in reality, your brain just hit the predictive text button. It bypassed the actual analytical processing altogether because analyzing the proposal would cost glucose.
Wow.
The error is completely masked from your conscious awareness because the brain delivers the wrong answer with the exact same speed, smoothness, and feeling of confidence that it would deliver a right answer.
That completely alters how we should view our own confidence. I mean, it means that the feeling of fluency, that feeling that an idea just clicks or a decision was effortless to make is actually a trap.
It is.
We're constantly confusing the speed of the thought with the quality of the thought. If it feels easy, we assume it's right, when in fact the easiness just means our low power mode took over.
That is the hidden cost of speed.
Mhm.
We prioritize the efficiency of the cognitive processing over the integrity of the information. And because this is happening behind the curtain, we are incredibly vulnerable to accepting deeply flawed premises simply because our brain wanted to clear its cognitive inbox quickly.
Yeah, it just wants to empty the queue.
Exactly. Think about how this applies to consuming information today. You read a headline that aligns with your pre-existing worldview. Your brain immediately auto-completes the entire article. You feel this rush of competence and certainty as if you had rigorously analyzed the methodology of the data, when all you actually did was accept a low-calorie biological shortcut.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the author doesn't just leave us with this abstract dread about our invisible errors. The text points directly to a real-world, highly relatable phenomenon where this flawed machinery is absolutely running the show.
Yes, the first impression.
Right. It says that's why you trust first impressions, even when they're completely false. Now, on a conscious level, we all know the cliche, right? We know don't judge a book by its cover.
We say it all the time.
We logically understand that first impressions can be terribly misleading. Yet, when you actually meet someone new, that first impression feels undeniably true. So my question is, if these impressions are based on lazy, low-power mode heuristics, why do they feel so incredibly solid? Why does the brain defend a flimsy first impression so aggressively?
To understand that, we really have to look at how the brain manages its energy budget after a decision has been made. Consider the sheer volume of data involved in a first impression.
It's a lot to process.
It's an immense amount. You walk into a room and meet someone. In a fraction of a second, your brain is hit with their facial structure, their microexpressions, posture, vocal cadence, clothing, all of it. To process all of that accurately using System 2 analytical thought would require an immense, unjustifiable amount of energy.
Way too much glucose.
Way too much. So, true to form, the brain takes a shortcut. It grabs one or two superficial data points, runs them through its heuristic database, and instantly auto-completes a full psychological profile.
And there's actually hard data on how fast this happens, right? Because I remember reading a study in the text showing that this autocomplete happens almost instantaneously.
Yes, research out of Princeton provides the perfect illustration of this. They found that your brain decides whether someone is trustworthy, competent, or likable within 100 milliseconds of seeing their face.
Wait, 100 milliseconds, that's a tenth of a second.
1/10 of a second. You haven't even heard the person speak a single word, yet your brain has already finalized their moral profile.
That is insane.
And here is the kicker. If they gave participants a full second to look at the face, their judgments didn't change at all. They just became more confident in their initial 100 millisecond snap judgment.
That completely dismantles the whole idea of going with your gut. I mean, we treat a gut feeling as this mystical, profound intuition, but you're saying it's literally just a 100 millisecond biological autocomplete.
That's all it is.
But that brings me back to the pushback. If it's so fast and flimsy, why do we hold on to it even when the person proves us wrong? Let's say 10 minutes later, that person you judged in a tenth of a second does something that totally contradicts your first impression. Why doesn't the brain just update the file?
Because, again, the brain views glucose like currency. Let's look at the accounting here.
Okay.
The brain spent a tiny bit of energy building that initial first impression file. When contradictory information arrives, the brain is faced with a choice. Option A, admit the first impression was wrong, open the file back up, delete the faulty data, power up the prefrontal cortex, and expend a massive amount of new energy to rigorously reevaluate this person from scratch.
Which, in the brain's currency, is a double expenditure. It's paying twice for the same interaction, it's just too expensive.
Exactly. It hates option A. Or there is option B. Ignore the new contradictory information, double down on the original false impression, and save the energy.
Wow.
The brain, operating in its strict low-power mode, will almost always choose option B. It biologically cannot justify the budget to recalculate. If the brain admitted the first impression was flimsy, it would be volunteering to do more metabolic work.
It's like the brain has a sunk cost fallacy about its own thoughts. Like, look, I already spent the energy generating this assumption. I am not going back in there to recalculate. Just ignore the evidence.
That is precisely what is happening.
Yeah.
The brain creates a sense of profound certainty around the false impression, specifically to protect its energy reserves. It actively lies to you to keep the battery from draining.
That is genuinely kind of scary.
The danger here is immense because we build our entire professional and social architectures on top of these unexamined foundations. We hire candidates because they, quote unquote, felt right in the first 100 milliseconds. We dismiss brilliant ideas because the person pitching them didn't match our autocomplete heuristic for competence. We trust the impression entirely, as the text notes, simply because the biological cost of changing our minds is too high.
So what does this all mean? We've essentially deconstructed this deeply unsettling biological machinery today. We've established that our brains are actively cutting corners, lying to us with an invisible autocomplete, and doubling down on completely false impressions just to save a few drops of metabolic gasoline.
That's the reality of it.
How do we actually function with this knowledge? The source text leaves us with one final warning, a very practical takeaway for your daily life. It says, so next time you feel certain about something, think again.
Think again.
To me, this demands a total inversion of how we experience the feeling of certainty. Because usually when we feel totally certain about a decision, we treat that feeling as a green light. We think, I feel no doubt, therefore I must have arrived at the absolute truth.
Which is the trap.
Right. Based on everything we've unpacked, feeling completely certain shouldn't be a green light at all. It should be treated as a blaring red flag.
That is the exact conceptual shift the text is demanding. The feeling of certainty is not a metric of truth. It is a metric of efficiency.
Ooh, I like that.
When you feel absolutely frictionlessly certain about a complex issue or a snap judgment, it rarely means you have thoroughly analyzed all the variables. More often than not, it simply means your brain has successfully found a shortcut so perfectly smooth that you didn't even notice the journey.
It means your low power mode is operating flawlessly to keep you from thinking.
Exactly. Calling it a red flag is the perfect way to frame it because the only way to combat this biological default is to intentionally introduce friction back into your own thought process.
You have to actively force the brain to spend the energy. You basically have to turn off low power mode manually.
Yes, critical thinking is not a natural biological state. It is an intentional, metabolically expensive, manual override of our brain's default operating system. When the text says think again, it is literally instructing you to power up the prefrontal cortex. It is a command to reject the cognitive fluency, to reject the first easy answer that pops into your conscious mind and force the brain to do the actual exhausting work of processing the reality in front of you.
Which takes a lot of humility.
It requires a profound humility about your own cognition. You have to navigate the world with the constant operating assumption that your initial read on any situation is highly likely to be flawed, heuristic-driven, and heavily edited for biological efficiency.
It's essentially treating your own mind like a slightly untrustworthy narrator. You know, you're reading the story it gives you, but you constantly have to check the footnotes to see if the sources actually hold up, or if your brain just made them up to save time.
And that ongoing deliberate vigilance is the only defense we have against the efficiency of error, because the brain will never stop trying to save energy. The evolutionary imperative hasn't changed. The biases and the autocomplete will never stop running in the background.
They're permanent features.
Exactly. The only variable you can actually control is your willingness to pause, step out of the illusion of competence, and demand actual rigorous evidence from your own intellect before you blindly accept its conclusions.
Which brings us full circle back to that provocative opening hook. The idea that we've been using our brains wrong. I think the real wrongness isn't that the brain takes these metabolic shortcuts because, as we've established, it biologically has to.
Right, it's just trying to survive.
The wrongness is that we've been blindly trusting those shortcuts without ever auditing them. We've allowed the smartphone to stay in low power mode for so long that we forgot what a fully illuminated screen even looks like. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the architecture of our own errors, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that really builds on the foundation of what we've talked about today.
Let's hear it.
If our brains are biologically hardwired to save energy by making us feel falsely certain, Could it be that our most deeply held, unshakable beliefs, the very convictions we define our entire identities around, aren't actually profound universal truths that we've discovered? Could they simply be the most deeply ingrained cognitive shortcuts that our brains were just too exhausted to ever double check?
That is quite the question.
Look closely at one thing you are absolutely 100% certain about today and ask yourself, is this the objective truth or is it just a shortcut?